I'm going to tell you an interesting story of how the Rothschild family made their fortune. So this was back in 1700s. Meyer Rothschild is a smart man who knows how to manage money, but he doesn't have any capital. But he is in very good relationship with the Austrian king back in the time, who eventually leaves the control and the management of the money that the kingdom has in their treasury to Meyer Rothschild. So he doesn't steal that money. All he does is, rather than that money staying in the treasury's bank account, he essentially uses the power of compound interest and investments on those money, and he makes profits, and he keeps the profit from that initial capital. To a point where he already has a solid wealth under his name. So when the Napoleonic Wars happen and French and the British Empire are fighting against each other, the Rothschild family, with this initial capital, does something incredibly smart, which is they basically fund both sides of the war independently and secretly. So they're funding the French and they're funding the British on their in their war consumptions, which gives them an ability to essentially manipulate who would win the war. So so basically, there's this one day called it's not the Black Friday. It's essentially what happens is once the war starts and commences between Napoleon and England. I mean, historically, we know that Napoleon loses, right? But the British people didn't know that. So in Waterloo, this famous battlefield, it's the Rothschild family who gets the news of who won the first, 2 days before the general public in England gets it. And they spread disinformation saying that the British has lost the war. So people start panic selling their stocks in the London Stock Exchange. And essentially the value of stocks plummets in a day. And when that happens, they buy with their entire capital and the entire amount of debt that they can get into, they buy as much as cheap plummeted stocks as possible. 2 days later, the news hit London that, hey, Napoleon actually lost. The British won the war. Suddenly the confidence of the public is back on the market, everyone jumps back on the market, and the value of the market just skyrockets. And then they just make the first fortune through that 2-day disinformation campaign that they run into. And after that event, Meyer Rothschild essentially puts 5 of his sons, he has 5 sons, and he assigns 5 of them in different countries. 1 in England, 1 in France, 1 in Germany, 1 in Italy, and 1 in Spain, to to form the biggest banks that there ever is, which, by the way, became their Federal Reserve banks today. So that is how they use that wealth that they just created to basically instill upon the world what is known as today's current financial institutions.